Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Ulrich. I'm the director here at NYU Washington, D.C. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Abramson Family Auditorium for tonight's event, Alumni Spotlight, Women in and of the World. Tonight's panel is part of the NYU Wasserman Center's Career Week programming, as well as NYU Washington, D.C.'s Women in and of the World program series. And we have a Wasserman guest here to welcome you as well.
Hi, everyone. I would like to echo our welcome to you and thank you to our panelists for coming and speaking with us today. My name is Sarah Rosenthal. I'm an assistant director at the Wasserman Center for Career Development at New York University in New York. And I'm really thrilled to be here to sponsor this event with the Washington, D.C. site, as well as Women in and of the World. At Wasserman, our mission is to make sure that we're providing NYU students and some alumni on our panel, as well as all alumni around the world, with really comprehensive services and programs to assist them in their career exploration and job successes. So we accomplish this through a diverse array of programming, including resume and cover letter, reviews, interview prep, career fairs and expos, boot camps, employer presentations, collaborative programs like this one, and doing surveys to collect information on NYU graduates, where they're headed after they graduate from NYU, as well as what current NYU students are doing, whether it's part-time jobs and internships like many of you have, to find out more about the career-related activities that students are engaging with while they're at NYU. So ultimately, it's our it's our goal to empower NYU students and alumni to succeed at every stage, whether it is as a first-year student or a seasoned professional. And I'm really excited to be hosting many other Career Week events later this week. And so thank you once again to Michael, to the entire Washington, D.C. staff, and especially to our panelists for allowing me to be here today.
Great. Thank you. A very warm welcome as well to our expert alumni that are here to discuss their international careers and offer advice to our students and young professionals around DC on how to prepare for success in an increasingly interconnected world. I'm also very thrilled to introduce you to our very own NYU Washington, D.C. student, James Pooler, who will be moderating tonight's discussion. James is a sophomore in the College of Arts and Sciences studying political science and philosophy. Last fall, James was nominated as an NYU Global Experience Scholar, and he's currently program manager of NYU DC Dialogues, a new student initiative which he will tell you about more in a few minutes. James is passionate about academia and cybersecurity, and hopefully moderating as well, and intends to pursue a career in diplomacy. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending this very special event. We're lucky to be in the presence of some of NYU's most accomplished alumni here in DC. I'm sorry. Before we meet tonight's speakers, I'd like to say a few words about the initiative that Michael mentioned. Tonight's discussion is special in that it is part of three programs. First of all, the Wasserman Center Career Week, the Women in and of the World series, and this freshly established student-led initiative, NYU DC Dialogues. The DC Dialogues is a student-led initiative which was created to engage the NYU DC community in key discussions on politics, culture, business, art, and much more. And unlike traditional panels, NYU DC Dialogues invites students to submit their topic proposals and invite speakers to come discuss things they truly care about. So for this event, the DC Dialogues Executive Board and the Wasserman Center convened with students to gather some of their questions, which I think will be very interesting for everyone. And that being said, I'm going to let my panelists open the floor and talk to us about their accomplishments, their career trajectory, and their affiliation with NYU. Starting from my left, Marjuan, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Great.
Great.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and for inviting me to be on this wonderful panel. We've all been saying how a lot of us didn't even know that this was here, so I'm excited to come back and be able to, connect with more alum. So my name is Marjuan Canady. I'm originally from DC. I grew up here. My family is actually Caribbean from Trinidad, and my dad's African American. So I've had a very unique background in growing up. Traveled a lot through the Caribbean as a child, and I attended Duke Ellington School of the Arts, which is a high school here. And then I went on to Fordham to do my undergrad in theater and African studies. So I actually attended NYU and got my master's in art and public policy from the Tisch School, which I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of the program. I think it was in its third year when I was there. So it was a program that looked at the interconnectedness of art, public policy, social justice, and how do all those things interconnect. So for me, my background was in theater, in the performing arts, and I had a love of it. I came to New York. I wanted to be on be on Broadway and do musical theater and have a career as an actor. And for me, it was kind of, for a lot of artists, it's kind of a traditional career or untraditional. But in my mind, I just, wanted to live in New York and kind of just go through the struggle, which I think a lot of artists in New York, they go through. But I decided to go to NYU because I had all of these interests in college. I was an academic. I loved history. I loved studying anthropology and African studies. But I also was an artist, and I've trained in theater. I studied theater in Russia for a couple months. So I was kind of all over the place, which I think, as students, you do have a lot of interests. You are inspired by a lot of different things, and sometimes it gets confusing to figure out, okay, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be in business. I want to, how can I do all of these things? So that was kind of where I was. So I was very excited when I heard about this program in the Tisch School. I actually auditioned for the grad acting program, and I got in there too. So it was a struggle for me to decide whether to go to grad acting at NYU or do this new program. So I went ahead and did this new program, and it was actually it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, really in my life. It was a one-year program, so it was very intense. It was a lot of work, a lot of, academically, but it pushed me artistically. It challenged me to write and be more creative in producing and creating work, which I never really did before. One of my professors was Anna D. Avery Smith, who is, an accomplished playwright, actress, and she was one of the main influencers for me in the next level of my career. So I pretty much, took all of my interest, and in that time, in that 1 year, I was very interested in feminism and, African history, new experimental ways of performing, and I decided to create a one-woman show during my time at NYU, kind of as my final thesis. And I never intended to, make a full show. I just really wanted to do it to graduate and not write a paper. So I ended up doing this play, and it just kind of took off. And I worked with a few of my friends at NYU, and we produced it. Kind of fast forward 3 or 4 years, I ended up doing it off Broadway. I performed it at about 30 colleges, toured it all over the country. And the play was called Girls, 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 and it looked at the interconnectedness of the power of the media and how it affects young women. And through satire, in the style of, if you guys are familiar with In Living Color, that type of hip-hop type of aesthetic. So it really got me thinking, how I use my art to speak out on issues that young people, face, and even, as a young woman, growing up and living in different areas and different cities, what is my voice, and how do I create art for meaning? So I think my time at NYU really shaped that and really formed that into what I do now. And what I do now, I have my own production company that is based in DC, and we produce a variety of works, live theater. Right now I'm really focusing on children's media. I have a children's brand called Callaloo, which teaches little children about ages 3 to about 10 about culture, and doing it through books, animation, television, live performance. And what we do is we go around to schools, festivals, we have digital content, and we create stories around folklore from different cultures. So I've been really focusing on that for the past 3 years or so, as well as working with a lot of local artists here and young people. I teach in the city theater and arts in different ways. So I work in a lot of different areas, but I think my time at NYU really allowed me to focus in on what I wanted to be doing, what I wanted to wake up and do every single day. And I think as an artist, you know, we kind of lead by passion. I knew I never wanted to, you know, go to the same office every single day and sit behind a desk. I like to get out and work with people, work with young people. I love to be creative. So I'm happy, you know, where I am. I'm mid-career, I'd say.
So you're not really a 9-to-5 person.
Not at all. Not at all, which has been a struggle. But I love what I do, and I can say every morning, you know, I think, you know, living in New York, you have that hustle mentality, especially if you stay there, afterwards. So I lived in New York for about 7-8 years, and then I moved out to LA, and I was doing more film and television work there. And I found that, you know, I went out there to be an actress, and I found out that I really loved producing, and I loved being behind the scenes. So which is great for me. I realized I love writing. I love making stories come to life, whether they're in front of the camera, behind the camera. You know, I love taking a great story and producing that. So besides all of my other work in terms of film, I really am getting more into documentary film, and really, I love being back home in DC and being able to work with artists here and young people, for them to think of themselves not just as artists or just as students, but as entrepreneurs. And how do we create, you know, a better community? How do we tell our story? So.
Yeah, that's pretty. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty unique to be working, I guess, in the art scene. And from what I know, your producing company tries to reconcile business and art. And I guess having that experience in New York and LA is a solid foundation to bring it all back here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely New York and LA, they're different industries. Yeah. New York is more theater-based, and I prefer the New York energy there, and LA is more film, production. Mm-hmm. But it was great to have that experience, which I'm sure, you know, students that are here in DC, it is very different from New York, still city, but the energy is a little different. You know, the people that you meet, mm-hmm. that you're exposed to here, you know, it's different. So I really enjoyed that, you know, being able to travel and live in different cities to figure out what I really wanted to do.
It helps.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next we have Sharron Levine, who actually holds Levine, sorry, excuse me, who actually holds 2 degrees from NYU, JD at the New York University School of Law, and a Bachelor of Arts in political science and Romance languages.
Right. So I'm originally from Kingston, Jamaica, so this is the Caribbean contingent. And I'm actually going to the Virgin Islands in a couple of weeks. So I knew 3 things in life. One was that I was going to study foreign languages, primarily French and Spanish. This was from high school. I was going to be in New York, come hell or high water, as they say, and I was going to NYU. And after that, I knew nothing else. So I'm sure some of you find yourselves in that boat. I currently am what's called the director of the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. It sounds like a mouthful, but it's a position that is mandated under Dodd-Frank. Many of you have heard of Dodd-Frank, hopefully. I am at the Federal Housing Finance Agency, FHFA, not FHA. And what we do is regulate Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and what's called the Federal Home Loan Banks. They play pretty much in the secondary mortgage market, which very briefly, they don't make loans directly to borrowers. They actually partner with, or I shouldn't say partner, they have relationships with lenders themselves who make loans to consumers, and then Fannie, Freddie, and the banks will actually buy the loans, which is why it's called the secondary mortgage market. I have practiced law for technically 32 years. So I've been at this for quite a while, even though in my current position, it's not a legal position, but I have to say that having the grounding in law is imperative from the perspective of knowing what it is that we have to do, because it is steeped in law, it is broad, it is all-encompassing. I focus on the diversity and inclusion of our agency, which is a federal government agency, but I also oversee and supervise all the diversity and inclusion activities of all our regulated entities, and they manage $6 trillion of assets. So it is a bit overwhelming at times, knowing the depth and breadth of what is involved, but I'm enjoying it. I came here, my path wasn't quite linear, although a bit more linear than Marjuan's. Having studied languages and political science, I thought I wanted to do public administration after graduating, but took a year to think that over, and then ended up in law school. So I've practiced in a variety of settings, large law firms, in-house positions, and this is my first federal government position. But it's everything that I have done in my life has led to this point. I find that life is built on incrementalism. You don't start knowing where well, some people do, but I certainly didn't. You don't start knowing exactly where you want to go, but each experience that you have, you build on that. And even if it's a negative experience, it's a learning experience. And I find that everything that I have experienced to date brings to bear on what I'm currently doing. So that's my spiel.
Thank you. As you may or may not know, a lot of our students here actually are in the NYU Liberal Studies program. Mm-hmm. And naturally you majored in liberal studies, technically, political science and Romance languages. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how relevant was your undergraduate education to a career in government, law, and related to somehow finance?
It's not directly relevant, obviously. But along the path of my profession, I have had the occasion to use my knowledge of French and Spanish in sort of the oddest ways. In one in-house position, for instance, the company was doing some joint venture work with a Parisian company, and I was the only person in the company who knew French. Of course, having studied 17th century and 18th century French and French literature, it didn't really have much of a bearing on corporate law, but I had studied them long enough and knew them well enough to be able to look at the documents, review them, and actually know what they were saying. I've had the occasion also in the financial services industry to use Spanish in looking at some of the environmental issues in transactions that we've had to do. So now in my position, I have a very deep sense of the diversity of this country, the demographic trends that are taking hold, globally, really, but especially in the U.S. I understand, because having studied the cultures of not only of French and Spanish, I also studied German and Latin. And so I have a real deep sense of what it means to be a minority, or what it means to be different, which is, I think, where we're headed in the direction of diversity and inclusion. What does it mean to be different? And what is the value that is brought to the table by being different? So the value is you're different and you bring value because of that diversity, not in spite of that diversity. So it's had some indirect influence, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, definitely. Well, I speak French myself, so
Right.
I can relate too. Well, it's fantastic to hear that your liberal studies education is somewhat relevant, certainly relevant to your career path. The liberal studies program, I think, is very much embedded in the value, NYU's value of global education. So that's always reassuring to hear, great to hear.
It also actually helped me to earn a living during college, because when I came from Jamaica, I was on a student visa. I got a work permit. I needed to make money. And so I was able to get a job in the School of Technology and Industrial Education. I don't know if it still exists at NYU. It probably doesn't. But as a trilingual typist, they were looking for 3 different people who could look at the curricula, one in French, one in Spanish, and the other in Haitian Creole, which I didn't speak.
Okay.
In any event, I figured it out. So they gave me all 3 jobs. Of course, they didn't pay me more than the one person,
Right,
but
yeah.
but it also helped me to earn a living along the way. So it was
Great.
very valuable.
Thank you. Next, we have Michelle Wyman, who's the Executive Director of the National Council for Science and the Environment.
Thank you. It's good to be here tonight, and please forgive, I've got my phone with me and it's buzzing a bit. I'll explain why in a minute, because I normally am not a fan of that. Let's see, where did I come from? I grew up in Texas, and I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up at all. And sometimes I still question if I've gotten clear on that answer. Let's see, for undergraduate, I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and I graduated with a BS in journalism and a BA in German literature. And coming out of that, thought for sure that at that point, I thought, okay, I'm gonna be a foreign correspondent because I want to travel. There's a lot going on at the time in Eastern Europe. A lot of friends and people were going over there doing good work, particularly writers. And I thought that I could affect change, work with people, get close to people that I admired through that work, and be able to travel. At the same time, while I was an undergraduate, I started working during the summers. So follow me on this, because this is the absolute crookedest path. And I say this with so much admiration for artists. As a non-artist person, I should be an artist just based on my path, but I'm the very least type of person that could qualify as an artist. I'm way too literal. But I started working during the summers as a park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park. And while I was there, I was a combination of an interpretive ranger on the geology staff, and also, because I was the only person that spoke French and German, able to entertain groups that were coming from overseas that didn't speak English and give them tours of Grand Canyon and the history. So what I didn't realize was this accidental process that was happening inside of me, where I started to fall in love with the environment around me. And so the outward-facing part of me, the non-self-aware part of me, was thinking, I'm going to go, I'm going to be a foreign correspondent, it's going to be great, right up until the end. And right when I graduated, I realized, wait a minute, I'm actually not sure if this is what I want to do. So I'm going to take some time. And in doing that, I ended up taking a job in North Central Texas in a small local government called the City of Euless. It's kind of sandwiched in between Dallas and Fort Worth. At the time, there were 42,000 people living there. And I took a position as a recycling coordinator. And the position was newly created as a result of a Senate mandate that was passed through states down to cities, not an uncommon thing. Local governments had to bear the cost. And it's really when the recycling movement started. So I took that job and I did it for 3 years. And in a way, it did not feed the part of me that really had evolved so deeply when I was at Grand Canyon. On the other hand, it really helped me understand that at Grand Canyon, the people that came to the canyon were a willing audience. They were interested, they were there for a reason, they knew why they came. The first city council meeting that I had where I had to present my budget and my program started with a council member raising their hand and saying to me, "I just want you to know, Miss Wyman," and I was 23 years old, "I did not support your position, and I'm not going to support your program." And this was in a public meeting. And so I realized that here I have this evolving passion for the environment, and I also am passionate about people and about leaders and people that choose particularly to focus their leadership within the public sector and for the public good. And some of those people believe very differently from how I believe, and they have a public stage to do that. So I did that work for 3 years, and I kept looking across the pond, and I kept looking outside the borders, but across the literal pond, across the Atlantic, thinking, you know, if there are recycling programs in the world right now that we could learn from, Germany's got the most amazing program so far. Now remember, this was a really long time ago. I'll age myself at some point tonight, I'm sure, but for now, let's just pretend it was last year, which it wasn't. So I applied for a fellowship with a German foundation called the Bosch Stiftung, and it was a fellowship program called Fellowship for New American Leaders. And I remember well, and I'm sharing this with all of you for a reason. I remember, and this is not for bragging, it's actually I'm still stunned that I was awarded this fellowship, and I'm extremely humble about it. And I share with you the following. I got the application, and in no way did I fit any of the criteria, including a requirement of a graduate degree. Ideally, how is the language they always put in applications? What would be ideal is a law degree. I had undergraduate degrees, no graduate experience. I had some work on the ground. And I was lucky enough to speak German, which is not a requirement, but another one of those, it would be ideal if. My father said, "You're dreaming, don't waste your time." And my mom said, "All the more reason, go for it. You've never been a circle that fits in a circle. You're a circle that fits in a square, so go for it." And I still remember the day that the doorbell rang, and back then FedEx wasn't so common, and there was a FedEx, and it came as an award, and there was this letter sitting in front of me, and it was life-changing. I spent a year on this professional fellowship program, and it still exists. I encourage you all to explore it. I basically was able to identify for the foundation the areas where I wanted to spend internships for the course of 9 months. It was a very well-paid professional fellowship. And because Bosch is a really well-recognized company, not only internationally, but very specifically, it's a point of pride for Germans on the manufacturing side, we could, as fellows, we could go and be placed in our internships at locations of our choosing. Again, circle in a square, rather than having 2 neat internships, one in the fall, one in the spring, what I proposed to the foundation was, well, now that you've said the sky's the limit, I'd like to spend the fall in the federal side with the Environment Ministry, and then I want to spend the spring spending 4 weeks at a series of regional governments, local governments, and state governments within the country. And after they got done being exasperated, they helped me structure that. And the purpose for that was to really identify firsthand and understand, why does recycling work so well in Germany, and why is it so difficult over here? During the course of that experience, over and over and over again, I started to think, you know, I need more education. And my passion for the environment was evolving further into a commitment to public service. So I started looking at graduate programs, and when I read about NYU, and I went to the School of Public Administration, the Wagner School, I just knew it was the perfect fit for me. I interviewed with a number of universities and again, sat down with some of the leadership at Wagner and without question knew that it was the right fit for what I wanted to do in graduate school and for the flexibility that I needed by virtue of the fact that I'm a circle and a square still now. I went through the program. While I was there, I had the opportunity to work for someone at the UN, and through that experience and that internship, worked with him with a focus on the Asian Pacific region. And we wrote a handbook for Asian Pacific local governments on recycling, which in some ways I still find a little bit ironic because I don't know why I was a person who was contributing to a handbook for people to implement in places where I hadn't been yet. But again, I share this with you because I think the level of exposure and access that you have when you're in New York and you have the campus as your base is an extraordinary asset. And my experience with NYU is it never hurt to ask, and it never hurt to put forward a big idea. And you know, don't ask it once. If no is the answer, find a different professor, talk to a different group of students, see if it might still be possible, if your passion is behind it, that you can usually find support. Doing good and doing well ends up finding a rich audience. It just is a matter of finding the right fit. After I graduated, I came to DC and worked very briefly for a law firm here. Again, circle and square, I'll just keep saying it. I was one of the first non-lawyer partners to establish a practice. The practice was focused on proactive environmental work with local governments. In other words, helping them put together a sustainability plan for their city or their county, and then being able to use that plan as a proactive way to be responsive to a compliance issue with the Clean Air Act, for example. So to be able to help local governments understand there's a lot of value in proactive, forward-thinking environmental work, it can serve you in many ways. Shortly after I got here, I fell in love with somebody who lived in California, so I moved over to the West Coast. And the best part about that was, when I was at NYU, I found this nonprofit organization that, to me, represented everything from mission to membership that I wanted to be a part of. It's called ICLEI, terrible acronym. The acronym stands for the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It's now a body of, I don't know, I think 15 offices globally. I had the privilege of serving as the executive director of the U.S. office for 6 years. During that time, I learned how to raise money with federal agencies. With support from USAID, we opened offices in Delhi, in, let's say, South Africa, in Brazil, and in the Philippines. So I was able to then really start to deepen my international work. And all of it kind of advancing this priority that I had that tracked all the way back to Grand Canyon, which was helping cultivate a value for natural resources, and to do that without compromising people's ability to earn a living and to live, but to live in complement with the earth. Since then, my goodness, I'll quit talking soon. I've had turns at the federal government. I served most recently as the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Energy under our current Secretary, Secretary Moniz, an unbelievably brilliant individual, and it was an extraordinary experience. And most recently have taken on the role as the executive director with this organization. And the mission of this organization, in many ways, like your experience, it represents a culmination of everything that I've done. The mission is to improve environmental policymaking and decision-making through science. It's an impartial organization, which is important in this day and age. It's impartial in hopefully a safe place where we can marry scientists with policymakers and help them have conversations that are constructive and, again, proactive. I'll stop there.
Thank you. It seems that NYU Wagner really played a role in reconciling your various interests, and it's always fantastic to hear that NYU is a perfect fit.
Absolutely.
In your career trajectory. And that being said, it is one of the top programs in public policy. And in your and it is also notorious for offering great leadership skills. And if anything, how have the leadership skills you've acquired there helped you advance forward in your career and also define what it is that you ended up doing?
Oh gosh, in a number of ways. The program itself that I was in, we did a lot of public speaking, within the classroom. I also had fantastic mentors. Sadly, my advisor, Dennis Smith, passed away this past year. But he was an extraordinary influencer and took me by the hand more than once, and kind of gave me a good motivational speech when I was nervous. A lot of the work that I was able to do at the UN, which happens often here in DC too, you're placed in positions that aren't necessarily what you're prepared for, but they're extraordinary opportunities. And over, Dennis would grab me by the hand and say, "You're good, you got this," and give me talking points. He taught me how to write my first speech. He made me write one for him. And I think in so many different ways that I hadn't anticipated, being at NYU and being in the city where the campus is located also, it's, you learn how to operate on your own and be self-sustaining pretty quickly.
Great, thank you for your insight. We're going to move on to Dr. Amy Zalman, who holds a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from the Graduate School of Arts and Science and is the director of the Council for Emerging National Security Affairs.
Yes and no. I'm on the board. I'm a board director of that nonprofit. I want to say that I'm increasingly feeling like I'm in incredibly privileged company. This is really, I don't know how many panels you've sat in front of where people are telling their careers, but not only is everyone here talented, but also it's rare to get the real story of how people arrive at their positions, and I find it very comforting because I thought it was just me. Because I thought a career was, something that if you were so lucky as to go to a cocktail party and somebody said, "What do?" you could answer in like 1 to 3 words, and I've never been able to, so I feel like I failed in that sense. Yes, I went to NYU following a Master's of Fine Arts in Poetry from another New York school to get a PhD in Arabic literature. And I did it because I wanted somebody else to pay for travel, which they did. And when I got, actually, and now I'm thinking that having spent sort of a winter in Jordan, I remember thinking that if I had done Caribbean studies, I would have been sort of better off because it snows there. I had a good time at NYU. A couple of the things that stand out for me were the mentorship of the person who was the dean, Kate Stimpson, for some years, and efforts that I made at that time. I was very briefly the president of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences Council to bring together career services and the private sector better on behalf of graduate students, because I didn't think we would all go on to academic careers. And so now it looks like those so many years later, a little bit over a decade, that is really sort of unfolding in ways that it wasn't 10, 15 years ago. What I knew at the end of my graduate study was that I wanted to do something international and global. I had already been engaged. I had spent some time in the Middle East and took advantage of various fellowships and so forth, that I wanted it to do with writing. I felt myself, and still do, to be a writer, and that I sort of liked something vaguely called strategy, and that I didn't want at that point to teach. I had done a lot of teaching for the last decade almost at that point. So I thought, I'll open an international consultancy, which was awesome, except for I had no business experience, whatever, and sort of academic parents. But I did. I thought with a business partner that at some point businesses would discover that the Middle East had markets, that people needed shoelaces and CDs and all the things, pharmaceuticals, all the things we need. I opened it with no connection whatever in the years just after the attacks on September 11th and just in the run-up to the war in Iraq. And as a result, there were no businesses going into the Middle East. The idea was a consultancy that would help sort of international projects and managers and those expanding do so with some cultural grace. So what happened instead is that my company became a military subcontractor, and I became acquainted with Washington at a very strange time. Sorry, I'm thinking of going from New York to Washington and this experience. So I spent some months kind of sitting in rooms in that particular moment in our history with like military intelligence guys and like advertising firms and people who had just learned a few words in Arabic and all kinds of sorts, sort of going in and out of rooms, deciding how we should communicate with all of these foreign audiences that we suddenly discovered we thought did not like us for a variety of reasons, whoever us was and whoever they was and so forth. So I did that, and I got distressed about it in a variety of ways. And I sort of remembered that I had a degree in literature, and I wrote a paper, because I thought I was a writer, about how we could think about narratives and narrative theory, and how that might help us think about our national strategic communications in a different way. And I showed it to someone, and they showed it to someone else, which is the sort of accidental, nice, not messy part when careers work. And they said, well, why don't you come to this thing in Monterey, and there'll be some defense people there, and there'll be some state people there. And I shared it with them, and we started to have a talk about narrative, which is now, I mean, for various reasons, but I think that I'm a tiny part of that, one of the ways that we talk about engagement in our global strategic communications. So after a while, it turned out my business was not going to work beyond that way that it had as a military subcontractor. So I closed it and needed a job, and somebody said, you could move to Washington and you could work in one of the big contractors here, which has since done all kinds of things, but it was called Science Applications International Corporation. So I came and I did, and somebody put a proposal in front of me and said, well, we never get these, but why don't you write a contract? And I did. And I did things. I did strategic communications projects for intelligence and defense clients. And on the side, kept talking about engagement and communication. And that brought me into the world beyond Virginia a little bit as well. I went to NATO. I went to Congress. I went to various thises and that's. And it turned into kind of a cottage career on the side, which I think is one way that sort of careers evolve or take those little steps forward. And at a moment when I knew that I wanted to leave and didn't really want to do working in that company, I had the right dinner with the right friend on the right night, and they said that the National Defense University develop a professorship maybe at the National War College, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It's where State Department and military officials and other folks in the civilian government, as well as foreign officers, go when they have reached a certain level of seniority and maybe promoted to flag officer or strategic levels. So they go there and they get a master's degree in strategy for a year. And they opened up this incredible position called Chair of Information Integration on the faculty of the National War College, and it became my job to sort of sell information as an element of national power inside that curriculum, where we know how to do diplomacy and we know really well how to do shooting, but we don't know so well how to work with this amorphous thing called information. And after doing that for a couple of years, I thought that teaching strategy was really interesting, but I sort of got the itch to lead something myself. So I went looking for a place to lead something, and I found a position as the CEO and president of a very long-standing organization, 50 years old, called the World Future Society, this amazing, crazy, global membership organization for futurists who are And I did that for a couple of years, I think, and that also brought me into the world. As it happens, the organization, I'm very proud of what happened in the last couple of years. It was one that was, this is what happens to organizations when they're 50 years old. They either get bigger or they get nothing. So ours, when I took it, was on the road to becoming nothing, and it is now, I think, going to flourish. I brought in some funding. I brought in a new chair of the board. And for a variety of reasons, I thought that it was prudent for that organization to go on without me. So as of a few weeks ago, I'm now where maybe some of you are, which is thinking again about, wow, how do I write the bio anew? And what's the story that I tell now that leads exactly to the next thing? And how do you keep unfolding that? I'm working on a book about futurists who are an interesting, amazing global tribe of their own. And thinking about what to do next, which might be my own thing or it might be something else.
Thank you. You mentioned that a highlight of your time at NYU was your mentor, and as you may or may not know, NYU DC has a very well-established alumni mentor program. And that being said, how would you say, how instrumental was this person to your creating your story, and perhaps how propelling you into the right environment to start off your career? And this question is open to anyone, really.
Yeah, I don't know that she would have supported any career that I went into. She was extraordinary. I think she did great things for NYU. She did a few things. She at least said on the outside she believed in me. She looked at work that I brought. She made herself available at a time when she, to me, she was somebody really extremely important at the end of a very large room with a desk. And when I went there, she sat down and had coffee with me. That was extremely important. And she had ideas for me when I didn't know exactly where to go or what move to make next. Even not in the deepest level of my academic stuff, because that wasn't hers, but at actually a more important sort of strategic level for me as a graduate student. I think she did all those things. But there was some, and she was a model.
Anyone else care to answer that question? Yes.
I have an experience with the chair of the Art and Public Policy Department, who recently passed, this last year actually, Randy Martin, and one of the things that he had us do in our arts politics class, I mean, he was really a philosopher at heart, but I just always remember, these blackboards with all these equations, and I mean, this is about art. You would think we were in, like a chemistry class or something. But he had one exercise that he always used to talk with me about specifically. He had all the artists, we are artist activists at heart. And he had us do an exercise where, write down the biggest dream you have as an artist, what you could create. What would that be if you could create one thing? And I don't remember what it was, but I wrote it down, and he said, write it down in detail. Where will it play? Who's the audience? Who's going to be there? What's the lights look like? The costumes, everything. What would it be? So I wrote this down in my journal, and I still have it. And then, so this is on one side what my dreams are. And then the other side, it was, why haven't I done it yet? And it was all of these things that I wrote down, why I haven't done it. It's, I don't have the money. I don't know how to do it. All of these things. But the point of that one exercise that I remembered, especially as artists, or even, young people, we have all these dreams. We say, when we're 5 years old, we want to be an astronaut, or we know what we want to do. But then as we get older, it's kind of like, oh, wait, I can't do that. Or wait, I don't have the money to do that. Oh, wait, I don't have a degree to do that. and that professor, he kind of just knocked that out for me. That even now, whenever I have an idea, I still do that same thing. This is what I want to do. I want to make a film, and I want to do it here, and these are the people that I need. And so I never write, oh, I can't do it. I'll write, okay, I need to get a cameraman. I need to get funding. This is what I need to make this happen, which I think whenever I work with young people and artists, I always do that same lesson. It's not about telling yourself, oh, I can't do it, but how do I get all of the things that I need to make that happen? So yeah, I mean, Randy was one of the main influencers at NYU that kind of got my gears thinking more, not just about being an artist or putting up a play, but how do I bring people together? How do I get the resources I need and making my mind think more business like. Yeah.
And to have it click together.
Yes.
Last but not least, Libby Locke, pleasure to have you here. You have a Bachelor of Arts in Politics and Economics from the College of Arts and Science.
I do. My name is Libby Locke. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, James, and the entire staff here at NYU and DC for hosting this panel. So I am a defamation lawyer. What does that mean? I sue the media for a living. And the defamation business is booming these days. My path to where I am now was probably the most linear of these accomplished ladies on the stage. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. And I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to go to law school. I think it was probably too many episodes of LA Law. Now I'm dating myself. And Law and Order, and wanting to have those dramatic moments in the courtroom. And so I started my legal career even before I got to NYU. As a junior in high school, I decided that I wanted to leave and go to college a little bit early. And so I went to the U.S. News and World Report ranking list and went and found applications for all of the top schools and went through them diligently to figure out which schools would admit students after their junior year of high school. And I got down on the list to NYU, and they were the highest ranked school that allowed students to apply after their junior year. And I applied, and lo and behold, I got in, and I ended up skipping my senior year of high school and moving to New York City when I was 17 years old. And spent 4 years in the Village and loving every minute of it. I have, as James mentioned, a degree in politics and economics. I think the mentorship question is a good one. I had a lot of really wonderful mentors in my professors at NYU, both in the politics and the economics department. And a lot of support through pursuing internships. I was an intern here on the Senate side of Congress between my junior and senior year, and my politics professors really encouraged me to come to Washington and study and be here. And that's where I got my first taste of the media, is working for then the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan as an intern. And I would, one of my jobs as an intern was to pick press clippings and put them together and work with one of the staffers to put them together for the press clippings for the senator to read basically an abbreviated version of the newspaper in the morning. And it was always interesting, especially when you're on Capitol Hill and you see the news being made throughout the course of the summer, and you see the difference between what actually happens and then how it gets reported. And so it really was my first introduction to the media and my interest in it. After NYU, I worked briefly for a year at a large law firm in New York City, and applied and was accepted to Georgetown University Law School. My love for DC sort of flourished when I was doing my internship while I was at NYU, and I came back to DC and studied law for 3 years at Georgetown, and then worked for a federal judge for a year, and went on to work in a big law firm here in Washington, DC. And while I was here, found another mentor who took me under his wing and introduced me to his practice, which was a media practice. He sued the media. It was my law firm. It was a big global law firm with, I think they had like something like 2,000 lawyers globally. Was one of the very few large law firms that would actually be adverse to the media as opposed to representing media corporations, and doing the defense side of media work. And got to know the practice, but felt I was there at this law firm for 8 or 9 years, and made partner at this law firm, but I fell in love with this practice. It's an interesting, I like to say it's a perfect intersection of law, media, and politics, because every story and every case always has some political bent to it. And oftentimes the media has an agenda when they're publishing the story and the point that they're trying to convey to their readers. But going back to this law firm, there for 8 or 9 years, it was increasingly becoming difficult to pursue this practice at this large law firm where I didn't have flexibility to charge clients different rates. There were a lot of conflicts. A partner in our Shanghai office would have done a deal for an affiliate of News Corp, and then I could no longer send a nasty lawyer letter to the Wall Street Journal. And so my mentor and I went out and we started our own law firm about 2 years ago. And we have what is now a global practice. It's mostly national, but we do have some international clients. We currently represent the Dean of Students of UVA, who was unfairly attacked by Rolling Stone in the gang rape article. We were the first to file a lawsuit against Rolling Stone, and that is progressing through litigation right now. It's going to be a very interesting case. It's set to go to trial in October. And you know, it's an interesting area because, you know, we hear a lot about and read a lot about the balance of power between the government, large corporations, and who really holds the power in America. But we hear less about who checks the media's power, who is there to protect and defend corporations or individuals when the media gets it wrong. In an age of social media and the internet and 24-hour news cycles, what happens when you are unfairly targeted and false and negative things are written about you and a story goes viral in a matter of minutes? And so that's what I do.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems to be definitely an interesting field, especially now that media is 24 hours news cycles, even more accessible than ever before. And also how it, especially we see it here in DC, how it really defines the balance of power, who has the largest, most important voice in the media. I think we've all noticed that Donald Trump is relatively popular on CNN and whatnot. And kind of just to stay in what you're working in, and you mentioned the UVA affair, which I think we are all aware of, more or less. What do you think was the biggest case of defamation in Washington, D.C. in the media?
I think the Rolling Stone case was probably the biggest journalistic debacle in the last decade. Mm-hmm. It has come out now that Rolling Stone relied primarily on a single source for their story, who it appears fabricated a story of gang rape. And through failure to fact check and get secondary sources for this report, tarnished an entire institution and really harmed the lives of many individuals. My client, her name is Nicole Aramo, got hundreds of emails with death threats things saying, I hope you have a daughter and she's raped one day. I mean, some really awful things with the way the media has this power to portray someone in such a negative light. And how does a dean of students at the University of Virginia fight back? She doesn't have the same megaphone that Rolling Stone magazine does. And so I think probably the Rolling Stone piece was the biggest one in recent memory.
Thank you. Well, we definitely have a really broad spectrum of international experience here, and a lot of students who are here are also here for the international experience, working in multinational institutions here in DC. And what has been your experience really working globally? And for young alumni and current students, what would be a piece of advice, a recommendation you would make?
I can say with my practice, protecting your reputation is increasingly difficult to do. And my biggest piece of advice is the internet is you can never remove something from the internet. And so for students, I'm glad I did not go to college in the Facebook era, and the cell phone camera era. I would be very mindful, and you have to be very careful of your surroundings and how you present yourself to an increasingly accessible world. Privacy is at a premium these days, and even when you're in what you think is a safe environment, cell phone cameras and things that you say or things that you can do can be published, and it doesn't take the mainstream media to do that anymore. It takes someone with some bad judgment to post something on Facebook, and your reputation can be tarnished, and it can influence your career for years and years to come. So my biggest piece of advice is be very cautious about social media and what you put on social media.
Any other insight on tips for a global career and what mistakes or things to do?
Go places.
Yeah.
Go places.
Yeah.
If you can, go, go to the actual place. When I went to work at SAIC in Virginia, I said, so is there travel in this job? And they said, no, we can, we have Google. And having had the experience actually from NYU, from life and from NYU of traveling, I knew that it was not the same. And I actually think that probably in some of the things that you're doing, that makes all the difference. If there had been public officials who knew in the arena of global affairs, which is not just foreign affairs and trade and so forth, if somebody has had the experience at some point of being elsewhere, I think it probably changes the way that they do their work. So get on a plane.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll just add to it. The time that I spent abroad as a professional, it informed and inspired going to NYU. And it really helped form an entirely different perspective about environmental policy domestically because I experienced it on the ground in a different country. I couldn't agree more. Go places. And there's nothing digital that is like being able to put your feet on the soil of a different country and talk to people and eat their food and spend time with them.
Right, but when you do that, approach it with a very open mind and not be judgmental. I can tell you, coming from one country and thinking and having a certain mindset, which was altered entirely when I came to this country and fit in different categories. And so just the difference is night and day between having that closed mind and that open mind, and try to listen. Very few people listen, and it's an art that needs to be cultivated. We all like to speak and be heard, but try to listen. You'll pick up a lot more.
Thank you. And well, you made a fine point on listening and being open, obviously, but in your experience, what have been some challenges in working with very diverse communities and possibly abroad?
So, well, working with, well, I can speak to the financial services industry, let me say. Language is a barrier because diverse communities don't necessarily speak English, and even though we have a significant Latin population, for Hispanic population, for instance, not everything is available in Spanish. It's in English, but not necessarily in Spanish. So trying to in the context of mortgage financing, let's say, what we're trying to do is to increase access for more borrowers from diverse backgrounds, to be able to get mortgages, to be able to buy homes. And when when they don't understand the English documents, or when we and our regulated entities don't understand the cultural norms and how different demographic groups behave, then they're not able to design and develop certain mortgage products, for instance, that can facilitate that increased access. So it's a dynamic that has real implications for people who live in this country. So a lot of minorities, immigrants, and generally sort of lower income folks. That's just a huge challenge that we're constantly trying to deal with on a daily basis.
Not a challenge, but I mean, one of the things that's potentially can happen when you go abroad, and I'm sure people in this room have experienced it, is that you become an unintentional ambassador, which is an interesting position to be in. And I don't know if you have had this, or you have been probably a bilateral ambassador for much of your life. But I mean, it's just an interesting position to be in, and one that is in certain ways a privilege if you have that opportunity, but also one that you can blow. And you may or may not think that you are an ambassador of what other people think you are an ambassador of.
Right.
Okay, well, we're soon going to be wrapping up, so I'm going to ask perhaps the least original question in the book, but one that is often very reassuring. If there was one piece of advice you'd give your younger self, your college self, sitting in the audience right now, what would it be?
I can easily say, go after challenges. Don't make your lives easy. And that sounds counterintuitive, but unless you feel a certain level of discomfort, you're not growing. And if you do want to grow, then it's imperative that you recognize and you admit to yourself that you don't know everything, and it's perfectly fine not to know everything, because no one knows everything. And it's hard. Especially as a lawyer, you get to a certain point where you think, oh my, I don't know enough, and I hate admitting that I don't know enough. But there's a certain point when you're a lawyer that you realize, it's okay, I know exactly what I don't know, and it's perfectly fine. You can attest to that, right? So, but I would say, accept the hardest challenges that you can, because you will be better off for it.
Yeah, I second that. I recently read Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, and I think, this is a women's panel, and so I'll speak to the women in the audience. I think it's a terrific book. If you haven't read it, you should, especially as you are aspiring career women, to be your own best advocate. Don't wait to find the perfect mentor to be your advocate. And even though you may not know everything, try to lean into those challenges and reach beyond, like your story, reach beyond Even if you only qualify for 4 of the 10 criteria to apply for a job, apply for it. What's the worst that's going to happen? And don't take a step back to your male counterparts. Fake it until you make it. And that's what my mom always told me. Fake it until you make it. Because that's what the boys do. And so that's my biggest piece of advice. There were too many times in my career as a young lawyer where I let my male counterparts sort of take the credit because I wanted to be a team player, and they will. And you have to be your own best advocate. And that's not just the boys, anyone, anyway. Just make sure that you're your own best advocate, even with other girls in the room.
You know, I would give thought. I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of elected officials in my career, and I mentioned earlier that I wouldn't normally bring my phone up here. I haven't done that before, so I'm pretty embarrassed about it. But today we announced something through the work that I do. It was a bipartisan announcement by a group of 17 governors making a voluntary statement on clean energy. And part of the origination of that leadership initiative, and you'll see it in the news, hopefully, it's already been tracking on social media and some headlines during the day.
Hopefully reported fairly.
And so far, but I will tell you, I got a couple of them coming after me.
But problems, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Good to know.
But you know, it's history making in all seriousness, because we have 4 Republican governors and we have 13 Democratic governors that stood up today without a regulatory imperative. And we had planned this before the sad news of Justice Scalia's passing this weekend. We planned this before the Supreme Court ruling came out on the Clean Power Plan last week. And despite the things that have occurred, the governors chose to go forward. And the point that I want to leave you with from my perspective, that I would have told my younger self, is something that I ask elected officials every time I have the privilege of sitting down with one of them, whether it's a mayor, a prime minister, a governor, is I say, what do you want your legacy to be? Why did you run for office? What do you want to be remembered for? And I wish I had asked myself that. Not to be famous, you know, what will other people know me for? That doesn't matter. What do you want your legacy to be for yourself? And I really wish I had asked myself that before, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So I encourage you to carry that with you and give it thought over time and revisit it.
I think for me, I agree with what everyone has said. But I remember being at NYU and even in college, like, very active. I applied to everything. I probably didn't qualify for a lot of things, but I still applied. I was always, you know, involved, and I was always active. But I think if I could tell myself, my NYU self, when I was 23, I would say be patient and keep moving. Mm-hmm. And I think because we live in this instant access, social media, you know, online land now, we want everything to happen so quickly. You think when you get out of school, you know, you're going to have the best job, you know, you're going to become a lawyer immediately, you're going to be a partner immediately, you know, you're going to find your husband, your wife immediately. And it might happen, but it may not. And what do you do in that space when it's not happening? And I think for myself, like, I've been able to keep moving. And a lot of, you know, my friends, or, you know, artist friends especially, they always ask me that. You're always doing something. How do you keep moving? And I think it's because really getting out of school, I've been practicing patience. And patience in a lot of areas in my life, not just my career, but with relationships, with, you know, spirituality. And, you know, I originally just wanted to be an actor. I just wanted to be a performer. But now, you know, I'm an educator. I'm a business owner. I'm, you know, so many other things. I'm a director. I'm a writer. A lot of things that I never thought that this was a passion, or I could even make a living at this, but it means something more to me, you know, when I meet little kids and they ask me, oh, this is what you do for a job? This is a job? Wow. You know, and I think about that, like my legacy, like I can change someone's mind. You know, it may not be reflected just yet with, you know, financially or, you know, what I have materialistic, you know, in materials, but that patience, you know, it's coming. And you tell yourself it's coming. And I think sometimes as, you know, getting out of school, you want it to just be there. I got a degree, so that means that I can do it. It takes some time. You gotta grind on the pavement and prove that you're worthy to be in the office. You're worthy to be in front of people. And sometimes we forget that. Even now, I'm still out there. I'm still, what's the next thing? So, patience.
And keep looking forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
keep moving.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming. It was really great hearing your diverse perspectives and ranging from all these fields you're invested in. A warm round of applause would be lovely. Thank you so much. And I guess that now we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience. Kevin.
Question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I am currently interning at the Women's Foreign Policy Group, which is an international group that works to uplift the voices of women in leadership, both politically and around the world. So I was really intrigued by everything that you all had to say today. And right now, sort of in this framework of moving forward, I'm a junior, so I'm definitely looking towards the future. And I'm also looking for a little bit of a break and for a moment to like kind of clarify exactly what is my next step. So I guess if any of you have any advice or recommendations about what to do with time after college and whether or not to move right on to the next thing, whether that's grad school or law school, or if it's really worthwhile to take a year or two to spend some time exploring other options.
Or 3 or 4.
Yes.
It absolutely is worth it to take the time. I would strongly recommend not going straight into grad school because you bring a lot to the table with your own experiences. So in a classroom, it's you know, what the teacher has to impart to you, what other students have to impart. And I think the more experiences that graduate students have to share with the larger group, that it becomes a much more productive environment. So 3 or 4 or 5 years.
May I add to that? I mean, we know that the nature of how we work is changing. So you may get a degree in 3 years and you may get another in 15 or not get any. I mean, what's extraordinary is I feel like we've all been a bit in the gig economy before it existed, but things may not be so sequential
Right.
in the future because of drivers that are external even to your own drive. So it's always possible at this point. Those trajectories are more easily mixed up, I think, than they might have been in the past without anybody condemning them or it not working.
Yeah, I agree completely. Graduate schools are not going away. They will be there. Your youth, however, and your ability to take this time, your career, you have the rest of your life to build your career. You don't have the rest of your life to go to travel Europe or to go get on that airplane and you know, be a broke, starving artist for the first few years after college. And I took a year off between undergraduate and law school, and I wish I had taken more. It was really, truly one of the best years of my life, living as a single woman in New York City, just experiencing all that the city had to offer in a menial job, but with freedom. I mean, it was really incredible.
It also, when you take time and have different experiences, it gives you the insight into not necessarily what you want to do, but what you don't want to do. And I think that is equally important, knowing what it is that you could just never do. And so I took a year between college and law school and actually worked for a cruise line. You know, I was no Julie, but I was... It allowed me to travel freely for a year, but a path that I thought I would be taking after that year, I diverged from that entirely. But what it told me was that there was no way that I could sit there for the rest of my life and be a reservations agent for a cruise line.
Exactly. I worked as a corporate paralegal on the corporate side as opposed to litigation, and I knew that I never wanted to work in corporate law. It was not for me, but it was great. You know, it's exactly right. You learn from your experiences and what you love, but also what you don't love.
I think also, I agree with you too. I took a year as well from college to grad school, and I think in that time, besides having about 10 jobs, you know, I really did learn, oh, I don't want to, you know, be a traditional actor and go job to job to job. I have to figure out another way, because I told myself, I'm smarter than this. You know, I have all these other things that I want to do. I can't see myself, you know, rehearsing 6-7 hours a day, making $300 a week, which many actors make in New York. And this is, I don't know how they live, but this is what they do. So I realized that quickly. But I think for any program you want to go into, the difference of going to, I think, you know, being an undergrad versus a graduate degree, you really, when you go to graduate school, when you know you want to be there, you get more out of it. I don't want to say, you know, college is just, everyone does it, but graduate school is a choice. I think you want to be there. Every single person in my program wanted to be there. It wasn't like a lot of times parents push us to, you know, go to a certain school or, you know, just go to college. You figure it out later. But a graduate degree, a master's, a PhD, you want to be there. And you want to take advantage of all the opportunities there. So take some time, a year, 2, 3 years, travel. You may change your mind. You know, you may, I actually meet a lot of lawyers who are now actors, which is incredible, or even athletes, you know, athletes who are now, you know, in the entertainment industry, are directors and producers, which I think there are those connections, you know, which sometimes you don't figure out until you get some time to breathe in that space.
They're called recovering lawyers.
They're recovering.
We haven't recovered yet.
My question is about learning different or new languages. I know that Sharron, Michelle, and Amy, you all spoke about learning different literatures for different languages. What did you to learn a new language? And what made you choose the languages you learned?
So in Jamaica, we didn't have a choice. We had 4 foreign languages we had to learn. And fortunately for me, I loved foreign languages. I discovered that when I was age 10. And so, you know, certain people adapt very quickly. They learn languages very quickly. Others, it's not a strength. And so it all depends on the person. But now that I think about it, you know, studying languages really sort of led very indirectly to what I'm doing now, because not only studying the language, but studying the literature, the culture behind it, the norms, what makes a population or a culture very different from yours, are all critical to understanding that group. So the language is very rich, but there's a lot of other stuff around it that should accompany the actual study of a language.
My answer is very personal, but it actually ended up governing a good part of my career. There's a little more to it, but in the mid-90s, I was at Cornell, and everybody had an identity. Like, it was the moment of identity memoirs, and everybody, there was a Latino, and there were gays, and I didn't have one, I thought, but I did have a grandmother who was Sephardic from Turkey, and they spoke Ladino, they spoke a kind of Spanish, but I became gripped by sort of assuming and learning this identity. And then I became gripped by the Ottoman Empire and then the Islamic empires, and then I had to go learn Arabic. So I did.
I think we have one, two.
Hi.
So I graduated from NYU last year, and I'm very much, in the early part of my career. And transitioning from like academics to career, something that I really struggled with was I felt in academics, immediately like really personally connected and passionate about what I studied. Whereas I think in the career world, it's really like harder, at least for me, like, to find that direct link, that direct passion, and to not get like disillusioned. So I wondered from you, at that point in your lives, transitioning from academics to career, like how did you like maintain passion and like stay away from this like disillusionment just in that transition period? That makes sense.
I would say if you can't find passion in what you're doing in your career, try volunteering in an area where you think that passion can be fruitful for you, so to maintain that passion, because you don't want to become disillusioned.
I love your question because it actually points to something that we don't really get to talk about, which is that some of work is work. And that there's probably a lot of things that all of us do on some regular basis to get to go do the other stuff. That's great. And one of the things that's nice about our times is that people put together their lives in very different ways and find satisfaction in different ways, which is maybe not a full answer, but it is a realistic one. The way that I dealt with it was by continuing to go to school. Until the last possible moment when I realized I was not going to get another. And I'm not sure that I was working anyway, and others were professionalizing along the way, which I didn't fully grasp. So there are so many ways to put together a satisfying life.
It is a tough transition. I remember when I first started working at a law firm, after law school, it was the very first time for me personally where I didn't have a break at the next semester and a change of classes and a turning over of new material. It was just my career straight out in front of me with no end, and it's hard to figure out where the breaks are. And one of the things I would say is we Americans don't take our vacations, and we are a very highly driven society. And I think I saw a statistic that like how many millions of vacation days every year that aren't used. Take vacation days and really try to get those breaks in. And I think it's important for mental and emotional health to really take time away from work.
The only other thing I'd add to what everyone said is building community and trying to find opportunities to do that within your job as well as outside of your job. On the disillusionment side, when I came to DC and I worked for a law firm, I remember thinking it was the neatest thing in the world. I couldn't believe it. And maybe it's a known thing with when folks are studying law that a law firm, at least the firm I was with, provides you with the clothes you can wear to the gym, and the gym is in the building, And if you stay past a certain time, you can choose dinner from wherever you would like. And I remember thinking for the first several couple of months that was really awesome until I realized the reason behind that is because you're there a lot.
All the time.
All the time. And I did. I had those moments where I would just think, just like you said, my goodness, this is it. And
they give you everything you need to live without ever having to leave the building.
You never have to leave the building. You go in at 8.
It's really scary.
And you come out like at 11 at night.
If at all.
If at all. So it's true.
The next
So I
day.
started to think about how could I build community within this building, because I couldn't find my way out of it. And by the time I got out of it, most of the people that I did know in DC, which were different from my New York community, were either like way past a second glass of something or in bed, and I can't, and if you can't figure out how to build community, ask. I think people like us, part of why we're so chatty tonight, and y'all humor me on this, is everyone likes to be asked about what they do and why they're doing it. And even if that's where you start in building community in your office, is maybe finding that person who may be the least likely to engage with you, or that you might want to engage with. But sit down with them and ask them to talk about themselves and share their story with you.
But you also realistically, if I may add, think about what that passion means, right? Because your passion isn't necessarily another person's passion, and if you're projecting onto that person what that passion is, there will by definition be disillusionment, because there will be a disconnect. So try to keep that passion checked. I'm not saying not to have it, but just to be cognizant and be fully aware of what it is that you're feeling. What is it that you want? What are you looking for? Those are the questions that you need to ask, because passion isn't everything. I mean, there's a lot of hard work that's beneath it, depending on what that passion is, but it's harder work than it would first appear.
I think also, I just want to add, you will be disillusioned, and I'm just saying,
Or disappointed.
Disappointed and disillusioned to a certain extent. And it depends on what you do with that disappointment. I think one thing that a lot of schools or professors, they don't have time to. They don't have time to tell you, when you get out, you may not land your dream job. And you may end up, with a master's degree babysitting, which was one of my jobs. You may be a waiter. You may be, a yoga instructor or clean floors. These are all things that I did. A bartender, all types of things. But I never stayed in that space. Those are just things that I had to do to pay the bills. And I think that community, what you said is very important. Surrounding yourself with the people that, you want to work with, and being active. When we're in school, we have the structure there for us that tells us go to class, be here, be there, this fellowship, this opportunity. But when you get out, part of sometimes the disappointment is that you're not doing enough. You don't necessarily have a mentor there, which I think, I'm probably the youngest person up here, but I would say that that's something that I've struggled with. I wish I had a mentor, and I'm 29. I wish I had a mentor. I'm still
so
looking. I'm still looking for, someone that can lead me through the ropes, because I don't know everything. I'm still trying to figure it out. So definitely, I went through that experience, okay, I'm out, freedom, what do I do? And it's up to you. You have to be the one that looks for the fellowships, that looks for the next opportunity. Your professors aren't going to do that. Your schools aren't going to do that when you get out. They may have great alumni events or things that you can come back and connect, but you go to school so you can have that foundation where you feel confident enough that, when I step, into an audition, I know how to hit it on stage and on, on screen, and I know how to teach, and I know how to do this. You have that confidence because you have the background, but you have to be the one to push yourself out there.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions. Big thank you again to our speakers.
Thank you.
And there will be a reception hosted outside if you want to come down and ask questions. However, I know that some of you have class right now. And thank you again for coming.